I used to believe that a quiet life meant a safe one, that if I kept my head down and didn't disturb anyone, the world would leave me alone. But life has a way of hunting down the quiet ones, cornering them when they least expect it. I learned that the evening my mother collapsed face first onto our kitchen floor, her fingers still wrapped around the envelope she'd been hiding from me for weeks. I remember the sound, her breath catching, then the thud of her body hitting the tile. The shock froze me for a second, and then everything inside me spun as I ran to her, shaking her shoulders, yelling her name. You never expect the person who raised you to suddenly feel so breakable, so small. She'd always been this fierce, unstoppable woman, even when she was exhausted, even when life dragged her down. But as I knelt beside her, listening to her ragged breathing, all I could think was how fragile she looked, like a candle burning down to the last sliver of wick. At the hospital, they told me words no daughter wants to hear. Heart failure, severe, advanced, expensive treatment. I remember staring at the doctor's mouth as he spoke, but my brain refused to understand the sentences. My mother had always been the strong one. She wasn't supposed to be the one lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines she couldn't afford. I was working 2 shifts at the diner back then. I barely slept. Every night I told myself that if I just pushed a little harder, worked a little longer, we'd make it through. I didn't have savings, I didn't have insurance, I didn't have anyone to call. We were alone in every sense of the word. For weeks I pretended everything was under control. I'd stand by her bed, holding her hand, telling her the bills were handled, the medication was coming, the surgery was scheduled. But the truth was uglier, meaner. The truth was a stack of overdue notices on the kitchen table, each one more threatening than the last. I felt like the walls of our tiny home were pushing in, squeezing the breath out of me. Then one night, after a double shift that left my feet bleeding inside my shoes, I walked home with the kind of exhaustion that made the streetlights blur. That's when he approached me, my mother's landlord, carrying a clipboard and a smug smile like he'd won something. He reminded me we were 3 months behind. He didn't care that my mother was sick. He didn't care that I was barely staying upright. He just wanted his money, and he wanted it now. And if I couldn't pay, he said, he had other options. The way his eyes dragged over me made my stomach twist. I told him no. I told him to leave us alone. He laughed like he'd heard the same answer from 100 desperate women. That night I understood something painful. Poverty isn't just struggle, it's danger, real danger, the kind that follows you home and waits for you in the dark. I locked all the doors, but it didn't matter. Fear found a way into the house anyway. I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the landlord's voice in my head, the way he said we'd work something out. I needed money, not a little, but thousands. I needed it fast, before my mother's heart gave out or before that man came back with another offer. I tried everything, extra shifts, selling what little we owned, begging the hospital for extensions. Nothing changed, nothing moved. And every day my mother grew weaker. It felt like I was drowning in slow motion, screaming underwater where no one could hear me. Then, just when I was starting to break, something strange happened. A woman walked into the diner on a stormy Tuesday afternoon, dressed in a coat too expensive for a place that smelled like frying oil. She sat in my section, ordered nothing but black coffee, and watched me with sharp, curious eyes. At first I thought she was judging me. My cheap uniform, my messy hair, the dark circles from weeks without real sleep. But then she said something that made my whole body go still. "You look like someone who needs help." I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what she wanted. But the way she said it, softly, almost kindly, made something inside me crack open. I felt seen in a way that scared me. I told her I was fine. She smiled like she knew I was lying. She handed me her card, told me she worked in opportunities, whatever that meant. She said she helped women like me. Women with impossible choices, women cornered by life, women one step away from collapse. I didn't trust her, not really, but when someone throws a lifeline at a drowning person, It doesn't matter who's holding the rope. You grab it, you hold on, you pray it's strong enough. I slipped her card into my pocket and finished my shift with trembling hands. That night, while my mother slept with oxygen tubes hissing beside her, I pulled the card back out. One word was printed beneath her name: facilitator. No job title, no company, no address, just a phone number. It felt wrong, suspicious, maybe dangerous. But so did staying where I was. I looked at my mother's frail chest rising and falling, and I knew I was out of options. When a door appears in the dark, even a dangerous one, you push it open. You step through. You hope it leads somewhere better than where you came from. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the number for a long time. Then, heart pounding, I dialed. The call connected on the second ring, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I could hear a faint hum in the background, like she was standing in a place full of computers or machines. Then her voice slid through the receiver, smooth, calm, unsettling in how certain it sounded. She said she'd been expecting me. I didn't remember giving her my name, but she greeted me with it anyway, like we were old friends or long-lost family. I should have hung up. Every instinct whispered that this was the kind of moment where a person's life takes a turn, and once you step onto that new road, there's no way back. But desperation forces you into places you swore you'd never go. So instead of hanging up, I asked her what exactly she meant by help. She didn't ask for my story or my excuses. She didn't need convincing. Instead, she told me about a position, short-term, high-paying, discreet. She said the work required strength, silence, and a willingness to follow instructions without hesitation. That last part made my stomach clench. I tried to ask for details, but she waved my questions aside with that same velvet voice. "You'll understand everything when we meet," she said. "I don't discuss business over the phone." She told me to arrive the next morning at an address I didn't recognise, in a part of town I'd always avoided. She said to come alone. No explanations, no promises, just instructions. Before I could decide whether I should agree or not, she ended the call. I sat there in the dim light of our living room, the phone still pressed against my ear, feeling like I'd just opened a door that creaked into some dark, unknown hallway. My mother shifted in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't make out, and that tiny sound broke whatever was left of my hesitation. I needed money. I needed a miracle. Maybe I even needed danger, if it came with a paycheck. At dawn, I dressed in my cleanest clothes, which weren't very clean at all, pulled my hair back, and kissed my mother's forehead. She felt colder than usual. I whispered that I'd be back soon, but even I didn't believe myself. The address led me to a building with blacked-out windows and a metal door that didn't belong in any normal neighbourhood. It looked like a place where secrets lived, deep, ugly ones. I knocked once and waited. When the door finally opened, the woman from the diner was standing there. I hadn't noticed before how tall she was, or how her expression never fully settled into anything human. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't warm her eyes. She welcomed me in with a gesture that felt both polite and commanding. The inside of the building was shockingly clean, spotless in a way that made me more nervous than if it had been filthy. There were no windows, no decorations, nothing to indicate what the place was used for, just long, empty halls and closed doors. She led me to a room with a single wooden table and 2 chairs. A folder sat on the table, thick with papers and photographs. I didn't sit until she motioned for me to. She slid the folder toward me and told me to look through it. I opened it with trembling hands. The first photo made my breath catch. A girl around my age, maybe younger, bruises on her arms, fear in her eyes. The woman said her name softly, like she was reciting a memorized list of broken lives. The girl had run away from home, fallen into the hands of the wrong people, been trafficked across 3 states. The next photos were worse. Different girls, same nightmares, each story more desperate than the last. I felt sick. I asked what any of this had to do with me. That's when she leaned back, folded her arms, and told me what her organisation really did. They retrieved women, found them, extracted them, and returned them to safety. Sometimes it meant crossing lines, moral or legal. Sometimes it meant doing things that couldn't be written down. Sometimes it meant working in places where the police wouldn't or couldn't go. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I told her I wasn't a fighter, I wasn't brave, I wasn't strong enough for this. She shook her head like I was being ridiculous. "You're exactly the kind of woman we look for," she said. "Quiet, observant, desperate enough to commit." The word commit hit me like a slap. I asked what the job actually was. She finally gave me an answer. I would be placed undercover, posing as someone vulnerable, bait she called it, for the people who hunted girls like those in the photos. My chest tightened. She said I wouldn't be alone. Their team would monitor everything from the shadows, ready to intervene. But the danger would be real. The fear would be real. The payment, she said, was substantial. 50,000 upfront, more depending on the mission. 50,000. I couldn't breathe. I had never even seen that much money in my life. My mind raced through all the things I could fix, my mother's surgery, our debts, our home. But at what cost? I asked her why me? Why pick a stranger? Why trust someone who had nothing and no one? Her answer chilled me. She said they'd been watching me for weeks. They knew about my mother, the bills, the landlord. They knew my work schedule, my habits, my fears. They knew I was running out of time. "You were never a random choice," she said. "You came into our lives exactly when you were supposed to." I felt like the room had swallowed all the air. She asked me to sign a non-disclosure document, one that bound me to complete secrecy. The paper felt heavy in my hands. I stared at the dotted line until my vision blurred. She leaned closer, her voice dropping into something low and intimate. "Women like you don't get opportunities," she whispered. "You get survival. This is yours." I thought of my mother, pale and fading in her hospital bed. I thought of the landlord's cold smile. I thought of the bills that threatened to crush us. I thought of everything I had already lost. Then I picked up the pen. My hand shook as I signed my name, sealing a decision that would change everything. When I slid the paper back, she smiled again, this time with something like approval. "Welcome," she said. "Your life is about to get very different." And as I followed her out of the room, a cold certainty settled in my chest. Whatever I'd just agreed to, it wasn't salvation. It was the beginning of something darker, something I wasn't ready to face. But it was too late now. I was already in, and there was no turning back. The training began the next morning, long before the sun had even risen above the city. I arrived at the facility shaking from lack of sleep and fear I couldn't disguise. But the woman, who finally introduced herself as Mara, acted like my anxiety was irrelevant, a small detail she didn't have time to address. She walked me through a maze of corridors until we reached a basement level that smelled faintly of bleach and cold metal. Inside, a group of women waited, some young, some older, all of them with eyes that looked like they'd seen things most people never came back from. No one smiled, no one spoke. They simply studied me, quiet and calculating, like they were trying to determine whether I was going to be deadweight or a survivor. Mara introduced them not by names, but by roles: tracker, handler, extractor, analyst. It sounded less like a rescue team and more like a unit designed for war. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. Over the next week, they tore me down and rebuilt me in ways I didn't think were possible. I learned how to read a room without looking like I was paying attention, how to hide fear behind calm eyes, how to subtly signal distress without speaking. They taught me to fight, not like in movies with dramatic kicks and punches, but in brutal, efficient movements meant to break an attacker long enough to run. The trainer, a woman with a shaved head and a scar running down her jaw, forced me to practice until my arms trembled and my knees buckled. "You're not here to win," she kept saying. "You're here to survive long enough for us to reach you." The words shouldn't have comforted me, but they did. At least someone would be watching. At least I wouldn't be alone. Still, The exhaustion was constant. Every night I collapsed into one of the facility's cold metal beds, haunted by the reality of what I'd signed up for. Mara checked on me once, only once, after a particularly brutal training session where I'd failed the escape drill 3 times in a row. She stood beside my bed, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're not weak," she said quietly. "You're scared, and fear is useful. It keeps you alive." I didn't answer. She didn't expect me to. She simply left, the door clicking shut behind her. But that small moment, that fraction of humanity, kept me from walking away. It told me that buried under her precision and coldness was a woman who understood what fear did to people like us. By the end of the week, I felt like a ghost wearing someone else's skin. My body was bruised, my mind stretched thin, and yet there was a strange sense of purpose forming in the cracks of my old life. For the first time in months, I felt like I was doing something that mattered, even if it terrified me. Then came the mission briefing. Mara led me into a windowless conference room where the rest of the team waited. A projector hummed quietly as an image appeared on the wall. A warehouse on the outskirts of town, abandoned for years but recently repurposed by a trafficking ring. Girls were being held there before being transported across state lines. One of them, they said, was only 14. A girl who'd vanished from a bus stop 2 days ago. They needed someone the traffickers would notice, someone they'd target. Someone who looked vulnerable, desperate, and easy to take. Someone like me. Mara gave me the cover identity, Emily, 19 years old, homeless, estranged from family, sleeping in shelters, walking alone at night. They'd created documents, social media traces, even staged photos to sell the story. They would monitor me through a tiny device hidden in a bracelet they clasped around my wrist. If I tapped it twice, they'd storm the place. But the window of intervention was small. Too early, and the traffickers would scatter. Too late. I didn't let myself finish that thought. Inside the briefing room, the air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were bracing for what was coming. "We'll be close," the handler said, "always watching." But I'd already learned something important. In the moments that mattered, I would be alone. Completely. That night, they dropped me off 3 blocks away from the warehouse, dressed in ripped jeans, an oversized hoodie, and a thin backpack filled with useless items meant to make me look transient. The cold seeped into my bones as I walked down the dimly lit street, head bowed, footsteps slow and uncertain. I felt eyes on me almost immediately, not Mara's team hiding somewhere in the shadows, but strangers lingering near broken fences and dark alleyways. The city changed at night. It breathed differently. It watched differently. I hated the way men stared at me, like I was something fragile and disposable. I hated how convincing the disguise felt. I hated that this world existed at all, one where young girls could vanish and no one would notice until it was too late. I wandered near the warehouse entrance, pretending to check my phone even though it had no service. A beat-up truck idled nearby, its engine rumbling like a growl. I forced myself to look lost, to look tired, to look like a girl with nowhere to go. It didn't take long. A man stepped out of the truck, mid-30s, wearing a dirty jacket, eyes cold and assessing. My throat tightened. He walked toward me with a slow, practiced confidence. "You alone?" he asked. I swallowed hard and nodded, forcing the fear to stay behind my eyes without spilling over. He glanced around, then jerked his head toward the truck. "Got a warm place you can stay? Food too." The lie was so obvious it almost made me flinch, but I played the role. I hugged my arms around myself, hesitated just enough to seem unsure, and let him guide me toward the truck. My heart pounded as he opened the passenger door. The inside smelled like sweat and gasoline. I slid in, hands trembling in my lap. When he climbed in beside me and locked the doors, the weight of my decision crashed over me. I was inside. The mission had begun. And no matter how terrified I was, I couldn't tap that bracelet. Not yet. Not until I saw the other girls, Not until I found the missing 14-year-old. Not until I had something worth risking everything for. The truck pulled away from the curb, and in that moment, one truth cut through all the fear. I wasn't just bait anymore. I was walking straight into the heart of a nightmare, and the only way out was forward. The drive felt endless, even though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. Every bump in the road made my body tense. Every glance the man cast in my direction made my stomach twist. He didn't talk much, just chewed on something, breathing loud through his nose like he was irritated I hadn't thanked him for his kindness. I kept my gaze glued to the window, watching the city fade into stretches of empty lots and silent streets. The deeper we went, the colder everything felt, like the world outside the truck had stopped caring whether I came back. Mara's team was somewhere behind us, tracking the signal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was dangling over a cliff by a string, too thin to trust. Eventually, the truck turned down a dirt path behind the warehouse I'd seen in the briefing. From the outside, it looked abandoned, rusted metal siding, busted windows, weeds swallowing the foundation. But the small details exposed the truth. The tyre tracks carved into the mud, the faint glow leaking through a boarded window, the security camera half hidden under grime. The man parked behind the building and got out without a word, walking around to my door. When he opened it, the cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting my skin. "Come on," he said. His voice carried no warmth. I slid out slowly, reminding myself to stay small, stay scared, stay believable. He guided me toward a steel door on the side of the warehouse and knocked twice. The door opened a moment later, revealing another man, taller, broader, dressed in black like he was trying too hard to blend into shadows that didn't exist. His eyes swept over me with a disinterest that somehow felt worse than hunger. He didn't see a person. He saw merchandise. I felt anger flare somewhere deep inside me, but I crushed it down. Anger could get me killed. The second man stepped aside and motioned for me to enter. The warehouse smelled like sweat, gasoline, and something rotting in the walls. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, trembling shadows across the concrete floor. The sound of distant crying echoed through the space, soft, muffled, terrified. My breath hitched. Somewhere in this maze of metal and darkness was the missing girl, and maybe others, too many others. The first man nudged me forward, and I stumbled deeper inside. The warehouse opened into a large central area with makeshift rooms built from plywood and metal sheets, doors with padlocks, chains hanging on hooks, piles of old mattresses stained with things I didn't want to think about. A woman sat in the corner, maybe in her early 20s, knees pulled to her chest, eyes hollow. Her gaze flicked to mine for a fraction of a second, and the fear there nearly broke me. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to tap the bracelet and bring the whole building crashing down, but I held still. I forced myself to breathe. I had to get inside further, closer. I had to find the girl. The taller man gestured for me to follow him down a narrow hallway lined with metal doors. He talked as he walked, like he was giving a tour of a factory instead of a nightmare. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "If you behave, you'll get food. If you don't, you won't." I nodded weakly, pretending to be too scared to speak. At the end of the hallway, he unlocked a door and pushed it open. The room was small, just a cot, a bucket, and a single dim bulb hanging from a cord. The walls were covered in scratches, long and desperate. My throat tightened. "You said you needed a place to stay," the man said, smirking. "Well, here it is." He shut the door and locked it. I heard his footsteps fade, and then silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the air had weight. I waited 5 long minutes, listening for any sign that someone might still be nearby. Once I was sure I was alone, I crossed the tiny room and pressed my ear against the wall. Voices, faint but there. 2 men talking about a delivery scheduled for tomorrow. They mentioned new inventory and a package they needed to prep. I felt sick. I tapped the wall twice, our signal protocol, but softly, just in case someone outside could hear. No response. The bracelet wasn't for communication, it was only for emergencies. I had to keep going on my own. The next step was locating the missing girl. I sank onto the cot, pretending to rest, but inside my mind raced. Every sound outside the door mattered, every cry, every whisper. Then I heard it, a small voice, so quiet I almost missed it. "Help!" The word was barely there, more exhale than speech. I pressed my ear to the bottom of the door. Again the voice, "Help me, please!" It was coming from the room next to mine. My heart slammed against my ribs. It had to be her, the 14-year-old. I whispered back, barely audible, "I'm here. I'm going to get you out." A soft sob answered me. I reached down and pressed my hand to the crack under the door, hoping she would feel the gesture, even if she couldn't see me. She whispered that they'd taken her shoes so she couldn't run, that they kept telling her she'd be on the road tomorrow. I wanted to tap the bracelet then. I wanted to end this. But if the team stormed the place too early, the traffickers in the back rooms would kill the girls. Before anyone could reach them, the timing had to be perfect. So I asked the girl a question that tore at me even as I said it. "How many girls are here?" Her answer turned my blood cold. 7. 7. Not 1. Not 2. 7 girls trapped in the dark. I sank back against the cot, nausea rolling inside me. My mission wasn't just to find her anymore, it was to get all of them out alive. And somewhere in this nightmare, something else felt off. Too quiet, too controlled, too easy. I didn't realize the danger until it was too late. Footsteps approached, heavy, fast, purposeful, keys jingled, the lock on my door turned. I scrambled backward just as the door flew open. The tall man stood there, expression hardening into something cold and sharp. His voice dropped into a low growl. "You're not who you said you were." My blood ran cold. Somehow, I'd been exposed. And as he stepped forward, everything inside me screamed the same truth. The real nightmare was just beginning. The moment his words hit the air, something inside me froze. Not my body, but my mind, as if every thought had been dipped in ice. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to look confused and scared the way Emily would have. But the man stepped closer, too close, his shadow swallowing mine on the concrete floor. "You think we don't check?" he said, his eyes narrowing. "Girls don't come around here without someone noticing, and you?" He reached out and grabbed my chin, twisting my face toward the dim bulb overhead. "You don't have the look of a runaway." My pulse hammered so violently I thought it might give me away. I forced myself to look down, as if submitting. He let go, shoved me backward onto the cot, and called out to someone in the hallway. A second set of footsteps approached, faster, heavier, angrier. The shorter man from the entrance appeared, breath smelling like cheap beer and old cigarettes. "Found her," the tall one said. "She's wired." My heart stopped. Wired? The bracelet. They must have seen me touching it earlier. Or maybe they were just paranoid enough to assume any girl who didn't cry loud enough was suspicious. Either way, they were circling the truth. I curled my wrist in, hiding the bracelet under my sleeve, but the shorter man lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Panic burst through me as he yanked my sleeve up, revealing the bracelet. His expression shifted. Not fear, but satisfaction, like he'd caught a rat in a trap. "Knew it," he muttered. "Get the knife." He turned to the tall man, who left without a word. A cold wave washed over me. They weren't going to remove the bracelet. They were going to remove my arm. I had seconds, maybe less. My training screamed inside me. Sharpened instincts I barely recognized as my own. Survival didn't wait for permission. It acted. Before he could react, I drove my knee upward, hard, catching him in the ribs. He grunted, stumbling back. I scrambled off the cot just as the tall man returned, knife glinting in his hand. The moment he saw me standing, ready, his eyes hardened. "So that's how it is." He lunged. I dodged barely, the blade slicing through the air where my shoulder had been a second earlier. I felt the wind of it, cold and final. The cot slammed into the wall as I stumbled back, hands shaking. "Stop," I said, voice cracking in a way that wasn't acting anymore. "Please!" He swung again. I dropped to the floor, rolling under the arc of his arm, and grabbed the metal bucket in the corner. I hurled it without thinking. It hit his knee with a dull clang, buying me a heartbeat. Not enough to run, not enough to fight properly, but enough to tap the bracelet, twice, hard. The second tap felt like slamming the last hope I had into the world. The tall man lunged again, rage erupting across his face. But before he reached me, the warehouse lights snapped off, every bulb, every flicker, plunging the place into choking darkness. Then the sound came. A low hum, a rumble, engines, doors slamming, boots hitting the ground outside like thunder. Mara's team, they were here. Relief hit me so fast and hard, my knees almost buckled, but I kept moving, kept crawling toward the door. The men cursed in the dark, their confusion breaking their confidence. Someone grabbed my ankle, nails biting into my skin. I kicked out blindly, connecting with something soft and wet, maybe his nose, maybe his mouth. He let go, snarling. Then gunshots cracked through the warehouse. Not wild or panicked, controlled, precise. Mara's team didn't fire warning shots. They didn't negotiate with monsters. They eliminated threats. Shouts spread across the building, orders being yelled, doors kicked open. I could hear the girls screaming in the other rooms. The short man darted past me, trying to escape, but a shadow emerged from the darkness behind him. A figure moved too quickly, too silently to be one of the traffickers. The sound that followed was soft, like a muffled impact, and the man crumpled to the floor. A flashlight snapped on, its beam slicing through the dark until it landed on me. "Target secured," a woman's voice said, steady and cold. The trainer. My chest loosened. For a moment, just a moment, I felt safe. But the tall man wasn't done. He rushed her from the side, knife raised, a shape of pure rage illuminated in the shaky light. She turned, too slow to fully block him. Instinct acted before thought. I lunged, slamming into his back with everything I had. We crashed to the floor, his knife skittering across the concrete. He scrambled for it, but I grabbed his wrist, nails digging into his skin. "You think you're saving them?" he hissed. "You're sending them somewhere worse." The words hit me harder than the bruise forming on my ribs. Worse? What could be worse than this? Before I could ask, before I could even breathe, the trainer slammed her boot into the side of his head, knocking him unconscious. She grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet. "Move," she ordered. Alarms blared through the warehouse now. Someone had triggered an alert. Mara's voice echoed through comms, sharp and clipped. "All units, extraction in progress. Package confirmed. Hostiles inbound. Multiple vehicles. Multiple vehicles. More traffickers were coming. Reinforcements. The nightmare wasn't over. It was evolving. The trainer pushed me toward the hallway where the girls were held. Doors were being cut open, locks broken, terrified faces illuminated by flashlight beams. 7 girls, crying, shaking, clutching the agents like lifelines. I searched for the 14-year-old and found her huddled in the corner, barefoot, trembling. I knelt beside her, holding out my hand. "I told you I'd come back," I whispered. She stared at me, disbelief melting into hope. "Are we safe now?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't, because behind us outside engines roared again, closer, louder, angrier. Reinforcements had arrived, and in the reflection of a broken window, I saw headlights, 3 trucks, racing toward the warehouse at full speed. The trainer swore under her breath. Mara's voice broke through the comms, harsher than I'd ever heard it. "Breach incoming, everyone brace. This just turned into a war zone." And as I wrapped my arm around the terrified girl, pulling her close, one truth settled into my bones like ice. We might not make it out alive. The truck slammed to a stop outside with a violence that rattled the warehouse walls, sending dust cascading from the rafters like the whole building was exhaling in fear. The girls whimpered, some burying their faces into the agents' jackets, others frozen in shock. The trainer positioned herself between the hallway and the main entrance, gun drawn, jaw clenched tight enough to crack. "Stay behind me," she ordered, but her voice wavered just enough for me to hear what she didn't say. We were outnumbered. The engines cut, leaving a terrible silence, the kind that comes before something catastrophic. Then footsteps, dozens of them, approached the building, boots pounding against gravel, the rhythm too coordinated to be panicked. These weren't small-time traffickers. These were soldiers of the trade, men who knew exactly what they were walking into. Mara's voice burst through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Fall back positions, prepare for breach." My breath caught as I pulled the 14-year-old girl closer. Her fingers dug into my hoodie, her body shaking like she might shatter if I let go. "It's okay," I whispered, though nothing was okay. "I'm not leaving you." The trainer glanced at me, then at the girl, something almost human flickering in her usually stone-cold eyes. "When they come through that door," she said quietly, "run toward the southwest exit. Don't stop. Don't look. Back. The analysts have it mapped. There's a clear path." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The metal door at the front groaned under pressure, someone trying to break it open with sheer force. Mara shouted another command through the comms, something about a tactical team approaching, but they weren't here yet. Not close enough, not fast enough. The door buckled inward. The girl screamed. I felt the girl in my arms cling so hard I wondered if she could feel my heart slamming against my ribs. The trainer raised her gun, breath steadying as if she were counting down in her head. 1 more second, just 1. The door exploded inward with a blast that shook the ground. Men swarmed inside, wearing masks and carrying rifles. The trainer fired immediately, dropping 2 of them before they could reach us. The hallway filled with smoke, screams, gunshots merging into a deafening storm. Adrenaline tore through me, sharp and electric, lighting every nerve on fire. "Go!" the trainer shouted. I grabbed the girl's hand and bolted down the hallway, pushing past plywood walls and broken doors. The other girls followed, guided by the agents shouting commands behind us. Bullets cracked into metal just inches from my head. Shards rained down around us like glass hail. We turned a corner just as a masked man lunged from the shadows. I reacted before I could think. I slammed my shoulder into him, knocking him off balance while the girl slipped past. He grabbed my hoodie, yanking me back, his grip iron tight. I clawed at his hand, gasping as he dragged me toward him. But before he could pull me in, a shot rang out. His body jerked, then collapsed at my feet. Behind him stood Mara, rifle steady, eyes blazing with something fierce and unforgiving. "Move!" she barked. We didn't argue. We ran. The southwest exit was up ahead, a rusted metal door the analysts had marked as the safest escape point. 2 agents flanked it, firing outward into the chaos of the yard where more traffickers pushed toward the building. Everything was smoke, fire, shouting, headlights cutting through darkness. A war zone, just like Mara had warned. One of the girls stumbled. I swung around, grabbed her arm and pulled her upright. "Don't stop!" I yelled. We burst through the exit into the freezing night air. The warehouse yard was a battlefield, agents taking cover behind vehicles, men shouting orders, muzzle flashes igniting the darkness. The girls scattered toward the armoured vans, waiting in the back. I shoved the 14-year-old toward the nearest one. "Get inside! Go!" She hesitated, eyes wide with terror. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," I lied, because someone had to make sure the others got out. She climbed into the van just as another explosion shook the ground. I spun around and saw Mara and the trainer emerging from the warehouse, dragging 2 girls with them. Behind them, fire licked the edges of the building, turning. The sky orange. "We're losing ground!" the trainer shouted. Mara pushed the girls toward the last waiting van. "Get them out, now!" But as the trainer turned, a masked man stepped from behind the corner of the warehouse, rifle raised. He fired. The trainer collapsed instantly. I screamed her name, but Mara grabbed my arm, pulling me back behind a concrete barrier. "She's gone!" she snapped. "Move!" I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The trainer, the woman who had taught me how to survive, was lying still in the dirt, blood pooling under her. More traffickers emerged, their silhouettes multiplying in the haze. Mara fired, her movements sharp and precise, but even I could see the truth. The enemy wasn't shrinking, they were growing. "We're pinned," I said, voice breaking. "There's too many." Mara's eyes hardened, but her voice softened for the first time since I'd met her. "You got the girls out, that's all that matters." But it wasn't, because the 14-year-old was in that van believing I was right behind her, because the trainer had died to get us this far, because if I walked away now, the darkness would win. And I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't running. I spotted a maintenance ladder bolted to the back of the warehouse and grabbed Mara's sleeve. "If we get to the roof, we can cover the vans, give the drivers time." She hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. We sprinted toward the ladder, weaving between burned-out barrels and broken crates as bullets tore the air around us. We climbed fast, the metal cold under our hands, the ladder shaking with each impact below. When we reached the roof, the entire scene unfolded beneath us. Agents falling back, vans revving, traffickers closing in. Mara positioned herself at the edge, rifle braced. "Call it," she said. Me. She wanted me to give the signal. I scanned the yard. The last van was boxed in by 2 trucks. The girls inside were screaming. The driver was slumped over, not moving. My chest tightened. We were too late. No, not yet. I raised my hand. "Now!" Mara opened fire, her shots precise, controlled, knocking the attackers off balance long enough for me to leap down the small access ladder and sprint toward the van. I threw the door open, grabbed the steering wheel, and floored the gas. The tyres spun, caught, then launched the van forward, smashing through the gap Mara had carved. Bullets chased us as we tore down the dirt road toward the waiting blockades. But we made it through. We made it out. Hours later, safe in a government facility miles away, the girls were wrapped in blankets, tended to by medics, their terror slowly dissolving into exhausted relief. Mara stood beside me, bruised, bloodied, but alive. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. I looked at the 14-year-old girl sitting on a cot, holding a warm cup of tea with trembling hands. When she saw me, her eyes softened and she whispered, "You came back." And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something warm break through the armour I'd been carrying. Hope, fragile, but real. We saved them. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the woman I was becoming. The one who wouldn't run anymore, the one who would fight the darkness instead of hiding from it. The one who finally understood that survival wasn't just staying alive, it was saving others too.